All right, welcome to the podcast. This is a very popular topic. We had a lot of requests for this topic, talking about GTD weekly review, GTD being getting things done. My name is Brooks. I'm the operations director at Asian Efficiency. And my co-host of the productivity show is Tan. So, hey, Tan, how's it going?
Hey, Brooks, good to see you. We are co-hosts of the Productivity Show, and the company behind us is Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm actually in the Netherlands as we are recording this. Um, and just before we went live, I told Brooks, hey, I need to create a update to my checklist, to my packing checklist, because I brought a mic with me. But one thing I did add to the checklist was to bring the cable for the mic. So now we're recording this on the AirPods. So if I sound a little different, it's because of the AirPods. So hopefully when I'm back at home, it'll be back to normal quality.
Yeah, we're recording this at 8 a.m. my time, so we're putting a test to all my claims about being a morning person. We're putting them to a test in this episode. All right, so we like to start every podcast episode and actually everything we do here at AE with sharing top 3 resources. So these are 3 quick tips that we're liking right now, and I will go through and do that. Number one, since we're talking about GTD, getting things done, it seems only right that one of our top 3 resources should be the book that started it all. So that is Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. I know that book really had a big part in starting my productivity journey. I know it's the same with you, Tan, as well. I have the old version with yellowing pages here on my desk, the original paper version, but I also have the newer version on Kindle as well. That's number one. Number 2 is the Verilux Happy Light, which is a light therapy light. And I know, Tan, you're a big fan of that. Maybe you can just share a word or two about what you like about that.
Yeah, so if you're someone who lives in a part or in a country or part of the world where you don't get a lot of natural sunlight, or when you wake up early and it's still dark, if you want to get the same benefits from getting natural sunlight, you can buy one of those devices, in this case a Verilux Happy Light, and kind of get you some sunlight indoors. So it allows you to kind of wake up, get your body going in the morning, and it's a great way to get some extra sunlight in while it might be still dark outside.
Great, that's number 2. And number 3 is Nozbe. Probably pronouncing that wrong, N-O-Z or Z as we say in Canada, B-E, which is one of the original GTD apps. It's a collaborative to-do app with cross-platform support. It was one of the original cross-platform apps as well. And it helps teams and individuals get projects done. And it kind of started with the GTD methodology. So it's been around a long time. I'm really happy to see it's still thriving. So we wanted to give them a shout out with our top 3 resources as well. So we're going to be talking about the GTD, Getting Things Done weekly review. Now, this is TPS311. 2 episodes ago in TPS309, we talked about the 5 GTD mistakes almost everyone makes. And one of those 5 is not doing the GTD weekly review consistently. So we wanted to, since that is such a big one that almost everyone goes through at some point, we wanted to do a more deep dive on the GTD weekly review today. So if you are somebody who has just started GTD and maybe your system is kind of getting out of control and you're not sure why, we're going to help you with that. If you started doing the GTD weekly review and it went really well, but then you're struggling with being consistent with it, we're going to be definitely sharing some tips about that. And even if you're already a GTD black belt, getting tips and getting a refresher about things like the GTD weekly review can be really helpful. And by the way, even if you don't use Getting Things Done, I think the weekly of everything related to to GTD, I think the weekly review methodology can work with pretty much any system, but the concepts. There isn't anything inherently GTD-y about it. So I think even if you don't use GTD, you're going to get a lot out of this episode. So Tan, maybe you can take us through, like, we said GTD weekly review about 50 times in this episode. Maybe you could share it. What is the GTD weekly review? Like, first of all, what is GTD? And second of all, what is the weekly review?
I feel like we should have a drinking game anytime we say GTD or weekly review, and someone takes a quick little sip of something, and it could be
Exactly.
something healthy like kombucha or a green juice. But yeah, so for those who are listening, if you're not familiar with GTD is, GTD stands for Getting Things Done, right? It's the methodology that David Allen, the creator, came up with. And he wrote a really popular book called Getting Things Done, which is the #1 resource we recommend it today. So it is his system, right? It is copyright to the David Allen Company. We are not affiliated with them whatsoever. We are big fans of their work, and we've used GTD in our own lives, and we use some sort of variation of it as well currently. And and one of the things that we want to talk about today is the weekly review, which is one of the processes of the 5 steps in GTD. So if you listen to the episode 309, so if you just go to theproductivityshow.com/309, where we talked about the 5 mistakes that most GTD users make. One of them is not conducting a weekly review or not really being consistent with it. And so if you're not familiar with what a weekly review is, think of it as like, you can do everything correctly, but if you're not keeping your projects up to date, if you're not sure what's coming ahead of you or what's in front of you and that you need to do, then you can have the best organization in the world. You can have like the best intentions, but you want to make sure that your system is always up to date and running smoothly. And that's really what the purpose is behind a weekly review. Right? So whether you use GTD or some sort of productivity methodology or even your own personal productivity system, I think every single methodology or system or thing that you create that allows you to be productive, there's some sort of process in there where you have to kind of check in with yourself and say, hey, am I on track? Is everything up to date? Is everything in my system that needs to be in there? Because if it's in my head, I don't want it to be there. I want it to be in my system. And we want to make sure it's all organized and good to go, and that we are clear on what's coming ahead of us. And that's really what the weekly review is all about. So you want to look at your projects, you want to look at your next actions, things that you're waiting for, right? So things that are blocked right now. What can you do to get yourself unblocked or unstuck, right? And are there things that you maybe forgot that you should put into your system? So these are some of the things that the weekly review kind of addresses. And if you skip this process, oftentimes what you'll find is most people who are listening to this are probably familiar with this too. They skip it 1 week and they go, oh, actually nothing bad happened whatsoever. And then life starts to slowly get a little bit more stressful. And then you skip it 2 weeks in a row, 3 weeks. And then before you know it, it's not really a routine anymore. And then all of a sudden you get to the stage where you kind of blow up, where your system's completely disorganized, everything's out of date, and you just want to give up and say, hey, maybe the GTD is not right for me, or I'm just so overwhelmed right now. Why do I want to do this? I'm just going to address the things that are really urgent right now. And these are all things that could have been prevented if you did a weekly review. So that's kind of like the summary of what it is. And I'm kind of curious to hear from your perspective, Brooks. How do you do kind of like a weekly review? How does that apply to your personal system?
Yeah, the book says that the weekly review is the critical success factor with making the process stick, and it kind of keeps it vague in a way. It says it's whatever you need to do to get your head empty again and get ready for the next few weeks, which isn't super prescriptive. So that's one of the reasons why we're going to help you today. But one thing that the benefit that I get out of the GTD weekly review is, when people who have done GTD will have experienced this. The very first time you go through, you capture everything, you identify your next actions, you get everything out of your head, you have that mind like water feeling. And this is like such a big thing when people implement GTD, because in the book, David Allen talks about having that mind like water feeling, and then you implement it and you're like, yes, I totally get what he's saying. But then over time, like you said, it kind of falls off the wheels. But with the GTD weekly review, you get to have that mind like water feeling on a weekly basis. So that's one of the big benefits for me. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take you through the 3 steps to doing a weekly review and talk about some of the ways that we use it personally. I have the paper version of the GTD book here, and for those who are watching this video on YouTube, there's one post-it note on there. And I think I put that post-it note there in like 2005 or 2006. And the one thing I post-it noted is the section on doing a weekly review, because I used it as a template to do it each week. But now what we want to do is give you a template as well. And there's lots of materials online about that. So what we're going to do is on August 11th, we're going to have one of our famous DTDT, or do the damn thing sessions, specifically on doing a GTD weekly review, where we're going to take you through all the steps and help you do your weekly review and build in a consistency kind of engine for that, so that you can go through and do it with alongside with Tan and I. So if you're interested in that, go to theproductivityshow.com/implement. And you can join in on that. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The GTD book breaks down the weekly review into 3 stages, at least the new version of it does, of the GTD book. So we're going to follow kind of that same pattern as well to begin with. And we're going to talk about the GTD weekly review in 3 stages. Number 1, get clear. So looking backwards. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is get current. So look at the current situation, make sure everything is set and you're good to go with, and you have a realistic version of what needs to be done in your current reality. And then get creative, look to the future, sometimes long in the future, and make sure that you're moving forward on some of your big goals. So we're going to start with tip number 1, which is to tie up any loose ends for the week before, or since you did your last review. And that's what David Allen refers to as get clear. So what this means is, what you want to do is you want to gather together all of the materials that you have around and make sure that you've captured any action items that have come out of the things that have happened since you last did your review. So for you, that might be loose papers around your desk. It might be notes that you've made. Maybe you have a notepad on your desk and you jot down notes. It's going through that to make sure you haven't missed anything. This is a big one. Look at your calendar items for the last week or since your last review, and see, are there anything you look at your calendar and you go, oh yeah, I should have, that's right, we talked about this. Sometimes just seeing it on your calendar will trigger a reminder of things that you remember. Oh yeah, we talked about this, and I know I need to do X, Y, and Z. Also, you can look at your email inbox. Do you see anything actionable there? Now, this is one thing that I actually maybe slightly disagree with the GTD book about. What it recommends is, on a weekly basis, it says you should get to inbox 0 at this point. So you should go through your email inbox and get to inbox 0, go through every single email, make sure everything's captured. In a perfect world, that is definitely something you should do. However, I think that is a big sticking point for people when they try to implement the weekly review, is because a lot of times our inboxes have possibly gotten out of control, and that's a totally different topic. But the mess in the email inbox, I think, leads to a lot of friction and resistance to doing a weekly review. So if you can't, or if it's not reasonable for you to get to go through your inbox and get to inbox 0, we totally understand. At the very least, just go through your email inbox for the last week or since your last review, and just see if you see any obvious action items that you need to pull out. That's kind of like a stopgap method. The next thing you want to do is look at your task manager inbox. So a lot of task managers like OmniFocus, Todoist, all sorts of different task managers have an inbox. And what you can do there is just look at your inbox and then make sure any action items or things you've dumped in there, you're now doing something with. So basically what it's all about is looking at all of these different places where little landmines could be hiding for you, and make sure you've captured the actionable items out of those, so they're not going to come back to haunt you, essentially, and you haven't missed anything. So for me, what I like to do is I sit down on my desk, I look around, any loose papers or notes around, I'll grab those. And then what I do is I go through my notepad. I have a notepad on my desk beside me. So what I do is every time I do a weekly review, I kind of draw a line after once I'm done. So I basically go back to my last line on my notepad and then just flip through and see if there's anything I haven't captured. That's number two. And then I look at my, like I said, I look at my calendar since the my last review, see if there's any action items trigger that, oh yeah, I need to ... aspect. And then, yeah, look through my email inbox. And then one thing that David Allen recommends in the book is also to empty your head. So what that means is give some time to sit there and think, is there anything that I just know I need to do? Because, you know, a lot of times we have these things that are kind of out there that we think about, but then we forget when we get back to our computer or something like that. So try to proactively think, what is it? Is there anything that I know is kind of lurking in the back of my mind that I need to get out of my head? So that's what I do. How about you, Tan? What do you do for this get clear, tying up loose ends kind of step in the weekly review?
I like your analogy of using landmines, because oftentimes when we think about getting clear in the weekly review process, we want to look at everything that's out there and figure out, okay, what did I miss? And you can create a really simple checklist for something like this, right? And by the end of today's episode, that's something I would recommend you do, where you kind of create a checklist for yourself to say, hey, I need to check my calendar. I need to check my notepad. I need to check this and check this. And so when I do my weekly review, that's something I have. So I know exactly what I need to do. It's kind of like a mechanical thing now, where you just go, okay, I need to check this. I need to check this. I need to check my calendar, empty my email, and so on. Right. So instead of relying on your memory to do something like this, I recommend that you create a checklist for something like this. So, for example, I know on my checklist it says check drafts, which is an app on my iPhone where sometimes I'll store random things. Now, 99% of the time, I usually store things right away in OmniFocus, but sometimes I have like a random idea or a quote, or I'm listening to something and I go, oh, you know what? I should capture that. And then I'll just think about it later and figure out what to do with it later. Right. And so 99% of the time, it will go straight into an OmniFocus inbox, which is also one of the steps I have in my weekly review. But in case it doesn't, if it lands in something like drafts, then I want to make sure I check that, because sometimes there's important information there, like phone numbers or just quotes that I captured, and I want to figure out what do I do with this later on, right? And so I clear my drafts, I clear my OmniFocus inbox, my email as much as possible. And one thing I sometimes also do is, like, I have these little notepads on my desk or sticky notes. And sometimes I'll take notes on these things too. Like, it's very rare, but I still made it a checklist item for me to kind of check, just in case, like you said, like this could be a landmine for me because I could have written something down, but I totally forgot about it. Right. So I think one of the big takeaways for people here that I found most helpful was to create a simple checklist for myself. Like, what are the things I need to check? So some things that Brooks already mentioned, right, or things you can use, like looking at your calendar, looking at loose papers, looking at your desk, and so on. And I know some people, they still text themselves with reminders or things that they need to do, which I think is so funny and a terrible idea. But I won't call out any names. But if you're somebody who texts him or herself, that's something you want to check as well. Check those notes, right? Maybe it's Apple Notes or OneNote or something else. I know some people still email themselves and say, hey, I want to remind myself of this, and then they email themselves. Especially if you're like driving in the car or something, right? Or you're annotating notes, or dictating notes, I should say, with Siri, then you can store it in many different places, right? So you want to create a checklist for yourself to see, okay, how can I make it really easy to get clear for myself?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's one thing I like better about the older version of the GTD book than the newer version, is that while the older version isn't broken up into these get clear, get current, get creative kind of buckets, I find the older version is a little better at looking at it. And this is the reason why I had that post-it note there, is seeing what it is you should be doing in a weekly review. I find it a little more clear, but I think that's an even better idea, is adapt to your own specific circumstance and make a checklist. I think that's a really great idea. So that's number one. Get clear, tying up those loose ends, looking for the landmines that that you know are out there. Number two is to get current. So that means plan out the steps to look at what you have currently and make sure your current reality or what is in your trusted system you can actually trust, because GTD talks all about the trusted system. And honestly, GTD or any other productivity system doesn't work unless you trust your system. So tip number two is to get current and make sure that you can trust your trusted system. So what you want to do is, once you have all those landmines and everything captured, you want to look at your projects. So projects in a GTD sense is anything that is more than one step that is considered a project. And usually if you're using a GTD app, then usually your app involves some sort of projects, and then you have actions associated with that project or tasks. Any task manager will probably have a project and a task. So look at your project, see, are there things in your system that have actually already been done? This happened to me this morning when I was looking through my OmniFocus. There's something I didn't do yesterday and I didn't check it off, or there's something I did a couple days ago but didn't check it off. So you don't check that off, get it out of my system. The next thing you want to do is look at what you should get rid of. This is one thing I think a lot of us don't do enough. We let kind of cruft build up in our task managers or our bullet journals or whatever it is over time, and they're just things that we're probably never going to do, or they don't really reflect what we should be doing. But we just keep them there. And so we kind of like skip over them when we're looking in our system. No, be honest with yourself and be ruthless. Are you really going to do this thing? Are you really going to do this JavaScript course that you thought would be a good idea and you capture it in your system? But you keep like pushing it forward every week or something like that. Like, are you honestly going to do this? If the answer is yes, that's great. So now you want to, when you're reviewing your next action, you want to make sure that you're actually going to do this thing. So that's one possible outcome. But another possible outcome is no, just get rid of it. There's nothing wrong with being ruthless. Next, you want to look through your projects and see, does every project have a next action? So in GTD parlance, the next action is the next thing you can do on this project. And what happens a lot of times is maybe we have a project in our system, whatever that trusted system is, and maybe we complete an action, but then we don't have the next step in the project to do captured. So then our project kind of sits around as an orphan, and that is something that means we never make further progress on that because we haven't captured that next action. So go through, does every project have a next action? The next thing you want to do is look at your waiting for list. So in GTD parlance, waiting for list is a special place in your system where you put things that you're waiting on others from, or you are waiting for something to happen. So you want to look through that waiting for list and say, okay, I've been waiting for this thing from Marmel for a week and haven't really heard back. Maybe it's a good time to reach out to her and see what's up. Or maybe I'm waiting for some event to occur, and then I look at my waiting for list and yep, that event is about to occur. So now I'm going to start moving that out of waiting for and starting to take action. So that's reviewing your projects. Then you want to review your next actions. So what is it that you need to accomplish? What is the next thing that you can do? And make sure that of all your next actions, are they truly the next action? Is there anything you could break down? Sometimes we have a next action that is really a project on its own. So are these things that we've captured in our system, are they truly next actions, or should we A, get rid of them, or B, maybe break it down further? The next thing you want to do is review your calendar. Now, I know we just said review your calendar, but that was reviewing your calendar looking backwards. Now you want to review your calendar looking forwards. So over the next week or the next time period, whatever your time period of choosing is, what sort of short, medium, and long-term calendar entries do you see? Do you have a meeting coming up next Thursday that somebody put on your calendar? Are there any action items associated with that? Do you need to do anything to prepare? Do you want to have some thinking time so that you're not just walking into a meeting cold and having stuff sprung on you? Can you do some thinking ahead of time so that you are prepared for it? If you're proactively looking forward at your calendar and capturing action items out of that, you'll be a lot more control over your time. Also, looking forward over your calendar can give you the opportunity to get rid of things too. If there's things on your calendar that are no longer relevant or you want to get out of them, this is your opportunity to get rid of those things. Also, if you have trips coming up or maybe a holiday coming up, do you need to get a certain project done before you go away in 2 weeks? Well, maybe you want to start adjusting things. Now's your time that you can look forward and make those determinations. So for me, I actually usually get a lot of benefit after this get current step, because it really forces you to get out of the day-to-day firefighting, like urgent but not important dip that you get stuck in. By going ahead and reviewing all your projects, you can either clear your task list, or you can get rid of things that aren't relevant, or you can start actually taking action and moving forward. So I'm actually a big fan of this get current step, and I think not a lot of us make use of it. How about you, Tan? When you're like doing the get current step, what sorts of things do you do?
For me, the most important part of this whole process is to have next actions in GTD lingo. So what that means is when I look at a project, say publishing a book, do I know what the next step is? Is there something in there that I know that I should be doing next? And if I don't know what that is, then it's so easy to start procrastinating, which is something we want to all avoid. And so part of my weekly review here is to look at every single project and say, okay, is there a very clear next step or next action here? And if there's not, then what do I need to do to make sure that I do have the next step there? And whether I actually work on it or not this upcoming week or tomorrow or whatever time frame I set for myself, I always want to make sure that there's something actionable in there. Because the worst thing that could happen to you in this process is you look at a project and you go, oh yeah, I'm supposed to publish a book. I'm not sure what to do next. I'll get back to it. And then 1 week later, you revisit the same project and you go, yeah, I'm not sure. Let me just, think about it some more. And then you just keep postponing it, which is kind of procrastination in a way, right? And because you're not clear on what the next step is, it's just easy to stay in that cycle. And that happened to me many times. And so once I kind of start reminding myself to say, hey, I need to make sure that every single project is actionable, right? It has a next action. It gave me so much more clarity to say, okay, oftentimes where I had the most resistance in terms of creating a next action, it was either a project I didn't want to work on. So when that came up, I would say, hey, maybe I should just put it in the someday maybe list or just discard it altogether. Or it was a project that I had very little clarity on. Like, why am I actually doing this? Why is this even important? And so I had to kind of dig deeper and say, why is this even on my list? Like, why am I even looking at this right now? Like, what's the goal of this? Like, how does this prioritize in terms of other things I need to do? And so to me, the most important part of this whole weekly review process is just getting clear on what are the next steps. And like I said earlier, it's easy to skip the weekly review because you're not going to feel the pain right away. It's kind of a delayed effect where it's going to boil and boil and boil, and then all of a sudden it'll just like hit you, right? It's kind of like boiling a frog. If you dump it in hot water, it'll jump right out. But if you put it in cold water first, and it'll just stay there, and then slowly boil the water, the frog will actually stay in the water and then die because it can't detect a change in temperature as fast. And it's the same thing with the weekly review. If you don't do it on a regular basis, you're kind of like boiling your own frog anyway, right? And we don't want to be doing that. We want to be eating our frogs. So we want to make sure that we do this consistently. And if you're not getting clear on next actions, or you find yourself in this pattern where you're just looking at your projects and go, yeah, I'm not sure what to do there, I'll just skip it. That's a really big red flag that you want to pay attention to, because that's the thing that you want to pay most attention to and say, hey, do I actually need to focus on this, or should I be putting this away? And once everything has been kind of like organized in the sense that, you know, there's a next step for everything, it gives you so much more confidence and clarity to say, okay, anytime I want to pick something up, I know exactly what I need to do.
I've never heard of anyone tying together boiling a frog and eating your frog before. That's some next level productivity content right there. I like that. All right, so that is that is number 2, to get current and learn to trust your trusted system. So tip number 3 is to think about and start planning the things that you could be doing to move your life and work forward. So that's get creative. So number 1 is GTD has a concept of the someday maybe list. So if you're somebody who uses that, what often tends to happen is we dump things on our someday maybe list, and then they just kind of stay there forever. So look at your someday maybe list. Is that someday or maybe time actually here? Maybe if so, then it's time to start thinking about how you can work this into the rest of your GTD system. Or maybe, again, maybe there's things you should ditch. If you know that there's something on that list that is just never going to happen, or it just doesn't reflect reality anymore, there's no point spending brain cycles and time reviewing that and kind of wishing. Like, get rid of it and move on to something that you can actually make happen, or that you will actually help you. That's number 1. Number 2, again, what can you eliminate out of your system? What is it that you can eliminate that will give you that time and space to be creative? One thing this is actually one thing I will say that I think the new version of the GTD book does a better job of the old version, is unlocking this whole section of, yeah, we're being productive, we're cranking widgets, we're checking things off, but what is this all for? You know, what is our work's goal or our life's goal? And so the whole point of this section is to free up time and space so we can be more creative in that aspect and don't get bogged down on the just checking off tasks. The next thing you want to think about is, what are some big ideas that you have? So there's that whole concept of, you know, you've probably heard it if you've read other productivity materials. You know, you have your 5-year plan. Now, how would you achieve it in 6 months? Or if you could do something 10 times better or 100 times better than you're doing now, like, how would you do it? Like, ask yourself those kind of big questions and allow your mind to go to you know, somewhat crazy places. This is a good opportunity for that. Having said all that, this is actually the area of the weekly review that I tend to kind of blow past. Perhaps this is an opportunity for improvement. I tend to personally to focus more on the get going with our trusted system than the kind of more big picture thinking. So that is definitely an opportunity for improvement for me. However, just because I am not super great at doing this part doesn't mean that I don't see the benefit of it. And if you are able to make it happen, I think a lot of really big long-term benefit can come from using this opportunity to do that type of stuff. How about you, Tan? Do you kind of make use of this section, or what do you do with your kind of get creative part of the weekly review?
So to add some color and clarity here, I've been a GTD user for many years, and over the years, I kind of created my own personal productivity system in a way, where it's a combination of all these different ideas, from like GTD to 12-week year to Franklin Covey to you name it, right? And I kind of created my own system over the years. So I've kind of taken different parts from different systems. And so I would say, if you are a purist when it comes to GTD, you probably want to follow this exact process. I personally don't. So for me, the way this whole big thinking, big picture ideation kind of falls into places, I do it on a quarterly basis. And so I don't do it on a weekly basis, I do it on a quarterly basis. And because I do it on a quarterly basis, what this allows me to do is to say, I have a quarterly goal, and every single week and every single day, I just need to focus on getting closer to that goal and making progress on that. And so the weekly review for me is more about checking in with myself to say, hey, am I making progress towards the quarterly goal? And am I on track? And am I doing the right things that bring me closer to that? And if I'm not, then I need to make some adjustments. And that's really what the weekly review is for me. And this is why we talked about this at the very beginning of this episode. Whether you use GTD or not, or use some other productivity system, the big idea here is you want to get current on everything, right? And we want to start looking at what we have going on and making sure that we're on the right path. And so I, like you, Brooks, kind of like gloss over this section of the weekly review process according to, GTD. And so for me, it's more about, okay, let's do this on a quarterly basis. And I have my own process for that, of like questions I ask myself, right? Thinking time, stuff that we've talked about before on the podcast. And then I kind of like break it down on kind of like a monthly basis to a weekly basis to say, hey, am I on track to hit my quarterly goal? And if I'm not, what kind of adjustments do I need to make? And that's kind of like how I approach this.
All right. So those are the three parts of a GTD review. So get clear, get current, and get creative. The most problem, though, with the GTD weekly review isn't so much the mechanics of the weekly review, it's being consistent with it. We've already talked about a number of times that it kind of sneaks up on you. You maybe skip it once and it's fine, but you don't feel the pain until later. So how do we fix this consistency problem? Because it is definitely a big challenge with GTD, is not being consistent with the weekly review, which then leads to all these other problems that we talked about. One thing I'll say is that the weekly review will never happen unless you make a time and place for it. If you just decide, hey, I'm going to do a review every week, it's not gonna happen. We have to be really proactive about making a time and place for having this weekly review. Now, David Allen in the book recommends blocking out 2 hours, which might sound way too much for you, which is totally fine. We'll talk about that in a bit. But what he recommends is blocking out 2 hours the afternoon of the last workday of the week. So for many people, that might be Friday. For other people, it might be other days. So say 2 hours Friday afternoon. The concept being that his justification for that is that you're kind of like, the things that happen in the week are still fresh in your mind. If an action item comes up, you realize, then chances are maybe your coworker is still there before going off for the weekend. And usually things are a little lighter Friday afternoons for many people, not everybody, but for many people. So that is what he tends to recommend. The key, though, is that you have to be realistic and experiment. You might start trying out with Friday afternoons, and maybe you start skipping it. Maybe you're like many people, you're tired Friday afternoons. Like, this is your lowest brain power part of the week. All you want to do is like chat with your coworkers about the weekend and then get out of there. Or maybe, maybe Friday afternoons don't work for you. But then what happens is, like we said, you tend to skip it and skip it and skip it. The key with a GTD weekly review is to be really proactive about experimenting. So if Friday afternoon doesn't work, maybe try Friday morning before you start your day. If that doesn't work, maybe try Thursday near the end of the day. If that doesn't work, maybe Sunday before your family wakes up. The key is to be proactive and experiment. And eventually you will find a time and a situation where it does work for you. Like, I know other people, what they like to do is they go have a ritual. And that's another thing that can help too, is make a ritual of things, is goes to a coffee shop nearby. This is back when coffee shops were open for everybody, but have a coffee shop nearby and does their weekly review there. So it's getting out of the office, getting out of the home, and that's a place that they do with their coffee every week. So that's a great idea. Kind of shake up the routine. If you struggle to be consistent with your weekly review, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, Dan, usually it's because of one of two things. Number one, you picked the wrong time or day. So what you want to do there, like I said, is ruthlessly experiment and try different scenarios to find the one that works for you. Don't just give up on doing reviews altogether, but try different scenarios. That's number one. And number two is your weekly review is just taking too long. Like, it's taking hours and hours to do. And you're just like, I just don't have time for this. And then it kind of falls by the wayside. Number one, I'll say the more you do a weekly review, the faster it gets. So that is something that I will say. But if it's taking too long, what I recommend is being more ruthless about the sorts of things that you review. Like Tan gave a perfect example about how the kind of get clear and get current part of brainstorming and thinking about big ideas. He's like, no, that just doesn't belong in my personal weekly review. So I'm going to move that off to a different scenario. So maybe that's what you want to do. Just focus on getting your trusted system nailed down and not worry, at least in your weekly review, about that type of more forward-looking stuff. Like maybe shift that off to a different scenario. Another thing you can do is use a tool, if you're a Mac user and iOS user anyway, use a tool like OmniFocus, which has a built-in review feature, which will take you through all your projects. And one thing you can do about those is, and this again, GTD purists will not like this, so cover your ears if you're a GTD purist. But what you can do in OmniFocus, if you use a tool like that for doing your weekly review, is you can set certain projects to not review weekly. Maybe there's a project that doesn't really change that much. You could set it to review monthly or every 2 weeks or whatever. You can customize the frequency that you review things, and that can speed it up too, because then you're just focusing on the things you really do need to review weekly. Again, the purists won't like it, but that is an option. Tan, do you have any other thoughts on that? Like if somebody is struggling to be consistent with your weekly review, maybe you've helped people with this in the past or something like that. Do you have any other thoughts on things they can do?
Yeah, one thing I will say before that though is I totally had forgotten that when it comes to being a purist GTD, that first and foremost, that's like a thing. That is a real thing. People are
Oh
really
yeah.
purist in some ways, and will scoff at you if you don't follow what the book says.
Mhm.
But the second thing is I forgot also that you can change the review cycles for your projects in OmniFocus, which I think is one of the most powerful features. But again, it's not a purist approach. But some things you just don't have to look at stuff every single week. Some things you just want to look at once a month. For example, I look at my someday maybe list like once a month. I don't look at it every single week. So, so I'm glad you brought that up because it brought me down memory lane of all the things I used to do and recommend and change. So, as far as like sticking to your weekly review, I think the most important thing that you mentioned, Brooks, there is if it takes too long, you're probably not going to make it consistent. So I think 2 hours is a little too long. Again, if you follow the purist methodology, right, meaning you do the big thinking and everything like that every single week, kudos to you. I'm all about, hey, I just need to get this done in 30 minutes and be clear, and let's roll. Let's start the week here, right? So that's just my approach. So if it takes too long, again, the more you do it, the faster you'll get it. So if the first time takes about an hour, trust me, the more you'll do it, you'll get it down to 45 minutes and you'll find ways to get it down to like 30 minutes over time. So don't stress out if it takes like an hour the first time you do it. It's very normal, very common. Second thing is I try to make this process as enjoyable as possible. So part of my weekly planning process is I have a checklist in there, a checklist item that says grab your favorite beverage, and it's kind of the same thing here. I want to make it as fun and as comfortable as possible when I do my weekly review, because it is exciting to me. It is fun. I don't consider it a chore. It allows me to get clear and current on everything. And so I want to make it really fun. So I grab like a Dr. Zevia or something like that, right? And if you watch this on YouTube, right, recording this productivity show episode, you see me grab that beverage before because it's one of my favorites. And that makes it really fun for me to go through my projects and say, okay, what kind of next actions do I have to create and so on. And so having done like hundreds of, weekly reviews at this point, maybe thousands, one of the things I will say is the shorter it is, the better. And the more enjoyable it is, the more likely you'll stick to it. And the main tip also being kind of what you kind of hinted at, but we'll make it the next step and the next action for this episode as well, is to say, let's schedule it and make a commitment to it, right? So for me, I do it every Sunday at 6 o'clock. Like that's kind of like my jam. Sunday evening before the week starts, I get clear on what I need to do. And if I can't do it on Sunday for whatever reason, let's say I'm traveling or spending time with family or something like that, then I'll do it before, the day before, typically on a Saturday or on a Friday. I typically don't like to do it on a Monday because I like to get up and running on a Monday right away and be certain about, okay, Monday morning is typically when I have the most energy and focus. And so I want to utilize that as much as possible. I don't want to bog myself down with doing a weekly review. So for me, I just know every Sunday at 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock, that's when I do it. So you want to create that ritual for yourself.
Yeah, and I've been going through disruption myself because traditionally I would do it on a Sunday as well. However, we're starting now that the quarantine is starting to lift here in my province, British Columbia. So we're starting to do like more weekend adventures, just like getting out of Vancouver. Now that we actually can, so my weekends have become quite disruptive. So I've been switching it around again, and I'm going back to Friday afternoon. The OG recommendation from David Allen, which I used to do when I worked in corporate. That's when I used to do it. Is Friday afternoon. So I'm gonna give that another try. So by the time this episode comes out, I'll drop on Twitter how that is going. I expect it to go okay. Cesar says if he waits 2 weeks to do a review, he'd go crazy. And yeah, just to be very like crystal clear, we're not recommending to lower the frequency of your review. I think there's still a huge amount of value to reviewing weekly. It's just specific projects, maybe you don't need to review every single week. For your general system, definitely recommend it, but maybe there's certain parts of it that you could review less frequently if there are things that don't change week to week. But again, 100% up to you. How are you surviving in the Netherlands with no Dr. Zevia, by the way, Tan? You doing okay?
I'm barely alive, but I'm here.
All right. So we're going to wrap this episode up now. So for final action steps, like Tan said, find that place and time when you can do your weekly review, make it enjoyable, make it realistic, ruthlessly experiment if you have to, and ruthlessly cut things from your schedule because that will make or from your system because that will make the whole thing go faster as well. Reminder of our Do the Damn Thing session, DTD session on August 11th. On this exact topic, we're going to take you through doing a GTD weekly review and help you through the process as we go through the process as well. That's at theproductivityshow.com/implement. And there will be links to everything that we talked about in the show notes at theproductivityshow.com/311. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for listening and have a great rest of your week.